Good morning, folks. I'm Rick Singleton, Provost of Queen's College, and delighted today to welcome you to our continuing education for clergy program session on coping with the holidays. We've asked two presenters, Reverend Dr. Jacinta Penny, who is the Director for Pastoral Care and Ethics at Eastern Health, and Mr. Paul Grimes, who's a pastoral care clinician in Pastoral Care and Ethics Department at the Health Sciences Center in Eastern Health. We've asked them to come and present and give some description of activities they've been involved with for many years in organizing and being a resource to others in the broader community and putting together events for families who've had a loss and who are facing all that has to be dealt with socially, emotionally, spiritually, and otherwise as they approach the first or second or other Christmases after the loss of a loved one. So that's what our presentation is. If you have any questions or comments, then you can bring them forward during the presentation. Every now and then we'll ask if there are, but the session then will be available, as most of you are likely by now watching it as a recorded session available through our YouTube channel on the Eastern Health website. So I first present to you Reverend Dr. Jacinta Penny, who is a graduate of Queen's College. So Jacinta, delighted to have you with us.
Thanks, Rick. Delighted to come back to these hello calls for sure. So hello, everybody. Just by way of introduction with our Coping with the Holidays presentations, what Paul and I are going to do is we're going to review basically how to run a session and share with you the content of our sessions. And at the end of running through the outline for our program, we're going to have a section on practical tips and hints for running your own. So at any point, do feel free to ask a question or connect with us after. So the purpose of a Coping with the Holiday session is really, we need to acknowledge that the holidays are a difficult time of year for people, and people are entitled to be sad. We do not try to fix people during Coping with the Holidays events. Rather, we help equip them to live through Christmas and New Year's and the memories that these occasions bring. So the design, how we've designed our Coping with the Holidays events, usually for about 1.5 hours, and we have 4 or 5 parts of our program, and Paul Grimes is going to present and run through with you the first part of that program.
Thank you, Jacinta, and thank you to Dr. Singleton as well for the invitation to be a part of this today. Good to see you again, sir.
Thank you.
All right. As Jacinta said, there are 4 or 5 sections to this. I will take you through the first section today, but we always want to acknowledge the fact. Now, let's see, we're trying to, seems like we've frozen here already. Okay, thank you. We always like to begin this by acknowledging that this presentation really originated with Dr. Singleton, who, when it was developed, was the Director of Pastoral Care and Ethics at Eastern Health, and really was the heart and soul behind this.
We have a lot of grief.
The goal of this session, really, as we meet with people, is we want to do 2 things. First of all, we certainly want to express our condolences to the folks who gather and show empathy to them for the loss that brings them to the gatherings. I think it's important to bring that human element into it, because we're all fellow travelers on this journey of life, and we all experience loss. And I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that we're into this together, and to express that compassion and understanding at the beginning. But we also want to give people hope that there's a way through this. People don't have to be stuck in their grief. Many people are, but they don't have to be. There is a way through it, and really the goal is to instill hope that there is a way through and to provide that information. The first section that we deal with is what to expect in grief. A number of definitions there. There are many that could actually be communicated, but a number that we present. The first one by Richard Olson: grief is the normal but bewildering cluster of ordinary human emotions arising in response to a significant loss, intensified and complicated by the relationship to the person or object lost. And normally if you ask someone on an average day, how are you? You'll get a response like, well, I'm sad, or I'm lonely, or I'm angry, or I'm upset, or whatever, because we tend, as we go through life on a normal day, to process our emotions one or two at a time. But if you ask someone who is grieving, how are you? Oftentimes you will hear them say, like, I don't know how I am. I'm a mess, or I'm a wreck, or they shrug because they can't put into words what they're feeling. And the reason for that is when we suffer a significant loss, so much changes we aren't able to process the feelings one at a time. We get an avalanche of emotion that overwhelms us, several feelings all at the one time. One analogy that Dr. Singleton often used, that I like to use as well in this, is the analogy of stained glass. And if it's held up to a bright light, you see clearly the individual colors, the red, the green, or the blue. But if you place the red behind the blue, it isn't red anymore. It isn't blue anymore. It's a combination of the two. And the more colors that you add to that, the harder it becomes to describe the new color, and the darker it gets. And that is the experience for people as they go through grief. It is normal human emotions we experience, but it's a bewildering cluster of them that just overwhelms us, and we don't really know how to express what's happening. A second definition of grief is it's the adjustment to loss of something that helps define us, and everyone's journey is different in this. A third one that resonates with a lot of people, I believe, comes from Rabbi Earl Groman: grief is love's unwillingness to let go. And that really sums it up. It shows us that grief is rooted in love, and when people realize that the love doesn't leave, it's always there, it makes a difference for people. The fourth definition: grief is the journey from the old normal to the new normal. Life doesn't return to the way it used to be following a significant loss. It does change. That doesn't mean you will never be happy or content again, but it does mean that life will be different from what it was, and it's the journey of traveling there. The different stages of grief that the vast majority of people go through, these stages, many people would recognize the author of these as being Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She wrote of the stages that people go through prior to their own death, but research has shown that people also go through these subsequent to the loss of a loved one. It's important to realize that people don't go through these like you would walk the steps of a staircase, where you go from one to the next until you graduate and come out the other end, but it's a very fluid back and forth process, as we will see as we go through this. It's important for people to know that grief is not a disorder, it's not a disease, it's not a sign of weakness, it's not contagious. It doesn't mean you're cracking up or losing your mind, which a lot of my clients seem to fear is happening to them, and they need to be reassured that that is not the case. Most people expect the grieving process and grief recovery process to look like this. They expect the worst of grief or the strongest feelings to be on the front end of it, and over time they expect it to taper off until they reach that new normal. And this, people who see grief as unfolding this way will use language like, it's been a month now, or it's been 3 months or 6 months, or it's been a year now, so you should be whatever their expectations are. And the expectation is because time is passing that things should be getting better. Then we hear the old cliche that time heals, and so if time is passing, you should be doing better. But the actual experience for most people is not a nice, smooth transition like this. For most people, it's like this. It's like a very painful, wild and crazy roller coaster ride. And grief instead is experienced as waves. The ups and downs that for many people are very, very difficult emotionally. There are a number of things that can trigger waves of grief. Dates are huge triggers. The first year there are so many things. Birthdays, anniversaries, Mother's Day, Father's Day, events that trigger memories, cause you to miss the person more because you're remembering what life was like in the past. Other things, simple things like smells. You walk in and you smell their favorite meal cooking, a song that comes on the radio, finding a coat in the closet you had forgotten was there, and on it goes. But what's happening here is that what needs to happen is happening. People need to be able to process their grief, deal with their thoughts and feelings and sadness, but they also need recess from that. And that's what this process allows for. We need those breaks to rest and to recharge the batteries and to heal. For many people, the most intense wave of grief doesn't happen the first few days or even the first few weeks. Most times, and this surprises many people, it comes a couple of months or more after the death of the person they love, and when it strikes, it can feel like a tidal wave. That tends to hit once the busyness of the death subsides, and in those first few days and weeks, there's so many things to be done. People are visiting, people are calling, there are legal matters to be taken care of, but there does come a time when things settle down, life returns to normal for everybody on the planet, it seems, except for you. And the reality sets in that life is different. The little things of life are different. The routine of setting the table, the things you picked up at the grocery store, and it strikes you, wow, life is not the way it used to be. And you see on this slide that there is a big increase in the waves just a little ways in, and that tends to be the pattern for many people. Some people are caught off guard by the fact as well that at the first anniversary of the death, the emotions can be very strong, and they can feel that it's a significant setback and they think something is wrong with them. But again, research has shown that the first anniversary, the grief waves can be as intense as when the death took place, because that is such a significant trigger. But after that, the waves tend to decrease and not be as hard as they once were. Many people want grief to work like this slide shows on the left-hand side, but the reality is that picture on the right-hand side, it's what it's like. It's very tangled, it's back and forth, and can be a rough process. It's certainly not smooth. Acute grief can become complicated grief after 4 to 6 months if the person is not coping well. And there are some symptoms of complicated grief, like sleeplessness and significant changes in eating habits, the inability to function in usual ways, person can't work, possible depression. There are a number of factors that contribute to complicated grief that you see listed here. Sudden death, the death of a child is a huge one. Loss from suicide, multiple losses, for example, if there's a house fire or an automobile accident and several people are taken at once. And the issue there is we only have so much emotional reserves to cope with things, and when you get multiple losses, we just get overwhelmed. The death of a loved one on the heels of a divorce or a job loss or some other significant loss can also overwhelm our ability to cope. Unfinished business can contribute to complicated grief. Endings that never come to an end. Someone dies and you're not sure what happened. The body is never found. Maybe there's a court action that keeps things tied up because there was a crime involved and it gets tied up in the justice system. There's lots of inquiry or speculation or unanswered questions, and all of these things can cause a lot of turbulence in the life of the grieving person. There are some ongoing signs that we can look for that indicate complicated grief is taking place. Feelings of helplessness and hopelessness in the person, decreased energy or fatigue, extended feelings of guilt severe insomnia, oversleeping, weight gain, weight loss, inappropriate social behaviors or risk-taking, excessive use of drugs or alcohol, flashbacks, recurrent nightmares, loss of interest in pleasures that were once enjoyed, suicidal thoughts or actions. And some of these things are normal to some extent in all grieving people. Our eating patterns are affected. Our sleeping patterns are affected. It's normal to have mood swings. It's normal to have intense feelings of sadness. But if they persist abnormally, if the person is looking sick or losing weight, or they can't function day to day, the sooner help is sought for them, the better. And especially if someone is a threat to themselves or to someone else, help needs to be sought. Grief affects us in every way, on every level, and there's many things could be mentioned here, but I'll just highlight a couple. Physically, a couple of symptoms is crying or trouble sleeping. Mentally, someone is unable to concentrate or stay focused. They're easily confused and forgetful. They may even be constantly thinking about the death. Socially, people are affected in many ways. A couple of examples: there can be change in peer relationships. People you thought were your friends tend to disappear because they don't know what to say or how to handle you. Withdrawal from friends and family can be significant as well. We know the emotional stages, of course. There are many different emotions that overwhelm us. And spiritually, we're affected. There may be a loss or questioning of faith, searching for the meaning of life, questioning why bad things have to happen. And that's something that is, you look back through Scripture, and people in every generation since the dawn of time have asked that. Things that may hinder the healing process: avoiding or minimizing our emotions, using alcohol or drugs to self-medicate, using work or frantic busyness to avoid feelings. The important thing to remember there is that buried feelings are always buried alive. And we need to find supports around us, whether personal or professional, that can help us process those emotions. I like William Wharton's approach to the tasks of mourning. And he talks about how a person can know that they've moved through the grieving process once these 4 tasks are completed. And the first is to accept the reality of the loss. Easier said than done. Second, to process the pain of the grief. And we need to find some way to do that, whether it's through talking it out with those who are our supports, or journaling if someone finds it difficult to talk about their feelings. The third task is to adjust to a world without the deceased. There are external adjustments. We have to learn to live daily without the person. There are internal adjustments. Who am I now? If you've been married to someone for 50 years, who am I now that they're no longer daily a part of who I am? And how do I deal with that? There are spiritual adjustments. And loss can certainly cause us to reframe our assumptive world and the big existential questions of life. The fourth task he talked about was to find an enduring connection with the deceased while embarking on a new life. And this is where we find a way to tuck the person we love into that part of our heart where they will always be, but we're able to function without the triggers of grief being completely overwhelming. And we realize there's a lot of life to live, a lot of love to give and receive, and we find a way to do that. Now, the holidays are difficult for a number of reasons. The season triggers memories. Our normal supports are out of place. People tend to be away. Family are worn out. One trip to the mall will do that to me. Professionals are off. Workplaces are closed, so professional supports tend not to be available. It can be a stressful time of year anyway. In relationships, the Visa card takes a hard hit. There's financial stress, there's physical demands, there's emotional expectations, and quite often we build a wall around ourselves to try to protect ourselves. So that's it for the first part. Jacinta comes on after this and talks about how we get through Christmas.
How do you move this? Is it this one? The left?
Yep.
Okay, thanks, Paul. So Paul's done an excellent, I think, overview of what we cover in part one, certainly with the, I guess, the foundational reasons why we use certain material and how important it is to explain to people why they're feeling what they're feeling and what's typical or common or normal at this time of year. So I'm just going to go through a few practical suggestions that if you're organizing a Coping with the Holidays presentation in your own parish or congregation, what have you, that you can do. This should, I guess, help you decide what you want to include there in terms of practical information or just practical acknowledgments that people need. So the mainstays are really our own coping skills and the supports around us. And I really like this quote. I've searched high and low for other quotes, but I've never found one that said it better than this one by Henry Nouwen, friendship. When we honestly ask ourselves which persons in our lives mean the most to us, we often find that it is those who, instead of giving much advice, solutions, or cures, have chosen rather to share our pain and touch our wounds with a gentle and tender hand. The friend who can be silent with us in a moment of confusion, who can stay with us in an hour of grief and bereavement, who can tolerate not knowing, not curing, not healing, and face with us the reality of our powerlessness. That is the friend who cares, and I believe that's what gives so many grieving people this time of year the ability to hope. So to move into some practical suggestions, and there's 3 slides of these that you can present to your audience, I guess, or people who come out to your sessions. We would recommend, sometimes it's certainly okay to change some routines, but not all. A lot of people who attend these sessions, yes, they may be lonely. Their world has been turned upside down. They're figuring out how to forge a new identity, but they're also coming because they want to talk about some of the practical realities, that life has irrevocably changed. So what are they going to do now? So there's a big existential question of who am I and what gives meaning to my life? But then there's all the practical aspects in our society of the expectations surrounding how people celebrate Christmas. And our recommendation, of course, is that people do what feels comfortable for them, but sometimes they need us as presenters to actually give some examples of what's okay, what's not okay, and then they sort of decide for themselves what they do as they find themselves, I guess, entering into Advent and December and full-blown Christmas and New Year's. Reach out to someone else. We would recommend that sometimes a lot of people say, there's no way I can decorate this year. I've got no stomach for it at all. The tree, everything turns my stomach. I don't want to look at it. And that's okay if people feel like that, but sometimes we can guide them to look at, well, what's really overwhelming you here? Is it you're thinking of, full-blown Christmas decorations where every room in your house has to look like a Las Vegas hotel with fancy decorations and lights everywhere? Or what is it that you feel that you just can't do? And let people know it's okay. You can scale it back, because really, do you want to live in your house the month of December and not have a Christmas tree? Is that really psychologically healthy long term? And by not having any decoration at all, what does that really accomplish? So sometimes to gently encourage somebody, why don't you pick one thing? Maybe you had a 12-foot Christmas tree in a very high foyer, your husband has died, and you don't know how to get up on the stepladder to decorate it. Well, you know what? That's what Walmart and Canadian Tire are for. Go get a 6.5, 7-foot one that we can manage ourselves. And I guess we've all been in positions there where we've had to change a little bit what our traditions were, and letting people know that that's okay, because sometimes people, for some reason, are so focused on what they've done past years, thinking that somehow they're failures as people celebrating Christmas if it can't always be on the scale it was before, that they think they can't do anything. So just acknowledging that is helpful. And this one here, well, shop from catalogs, I think probably we'll change that this year to shopping online, because that really seems to be popular these days. So we can avoid the trips to the mall if we want to. And some people decide to give away personal mementos of the loved one who has died, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as enough time has elapsed, of course, that we're not giving away things that we will regret giving away in the future. So caution people about that. If somebody had a collection of 100 ornaments and you decide that you will give 15 away, that sounds very healthy. Perhaps so the week after you've buried somebody, to totally rid your house of that collection might not always be the best idea. So that's what we do in this presentation. We just give a bit of an overview of some practical stuff that a lot of people are thinking about, but they don't always want to ask. Encourage people to be gentle with themselves. We do what feels comfortable. Some people, excuse me, I've had clients over the years that say they just absolutely, maybe they've had a child die and have no idea how to sign their holiday cards or Christmas emails that they send out to people. And sometimes just a simple, well, you know, call yourselves the Pennies, call yourselves the Grimes. Perhaps one person in the family is missing, but change it up that way. You don't have to write out everybody's names where every time you write it, you're reminded of the gaping hole that's in your family these days. And if you're a single person, well, you know, we have to sign our names, and those we're sending the cards or the letters to, they get it. They know why it's different. Going away for the holidays, the first year I started giving presentations like these, I think it was Christmas 2008, and I will always remember what a lady said to me whose husband had been dead for about 11 years. And she said, well, all of her children live on the mainland, so for her to have a family connection with her grandchildren, she goes away. But 11 years after he dies, that every single January 3rd, when she walks through the doors of her house, she feels his loss all over again. Now, she's a well-adjusted person. Paul was talking about grief as a slope, and there's waves of grief. It doesn't decimate her by any means, but why she shared that is she wanted to, I guess, highlight to everybody that going away for the holidays, we can't really run from our loved ones. Yes, it's really helpful to go places where we're surrounded by supportive family and friends. If that's another province, another country that works, go for it. But she just wanted to highlight the importance of being prepared for still feeling that emotional gap when you walk through the door and you just might be expecting to see somebody again. And she said, you know, you come back and you've had all these great adventures and a good time, and the person you might want to share, you know, the details of the travel with is no longer there. So that's helpful just to highlight to people who may be traveling away that when they return, and if they feel a bit out of sorts for a day or two, that again, that's fairly typical, and it's not usually a cause for concern. Just some here, again, and some of these are very similar to each other, and I go into various amounts of detail about each one, depending on time and depending on questions that may arise from the audience. Expect and accept the likelihood of pain. Again, that's typical. I used to use the word normal a lot, and then a member of one of our grief groups a couple of years ago mentioned that there was never anything normal in his life again after his daughter died in a tragic accident, and he could accept common and uncommon, typical and not typical, but he really never liked that idea that his life was going to be normal again, although it's a word we often use. Be reasonable in expectations. No matter, I guess, Christmas and the holidays are such a magical time. When those of us who are Christians, it's like those, the world of heaven and earth blurs a bit, and we get a taste of the holy, and we may experience that all year round as well, but just that magic and that sense of hope and peace as we commemorate the birth of a Savior, that some people who are more spiritually inclined than others may actually find that a bit disappointing, that they are still grief-stricken even though their faith is still fairly solid. So that might be an important acknowledgement as well to make. On another practical level, out of courtesy, let people know your plans and limits. If you're speaking with people in the session who just think that, no, they don't want to go anywhere where there's 20 people for Christmas dinner, no, they don't want to cook Christmas dinner for the 20 people either. And if that's a tradition that everybody else still thinks that they're going to be able to keep, well, out of courtesy to their friends and family, just to talk it out and let people know a bit in advance. We would encourage people in our sessions to spend time with restful people over the holidays, but we also acknowledge that we can choose our friends, but we can't choose our families. So we may have familial obligations where we do have to go and spend time with people that because of genetics, we have an obligation to spend time with, and that can sometimes trigger grief and add to our stress, but yet we do have to make those visits. So what we would suggest there is perhaps people limit the time that they spend with the unrestful people, for lack of a better term, and then maybe have a plan made for later that day, later that evening, or perhaps the next day where they are going to be spending time with people that they will find their company, I guess, more restful and more enjoyable. Don't be concerned. We would encourage people not to be concerned about asking for help. There's lots of people, I think, in our church families, in our communities. Sometimes people ask, now if there's anything I can do for you, let me know. And we're not really sure if they meant it, or maybe they meant it at the time, but it's 2 months in and Christmas is coming up, and you're just really wondering, did they mean that? So sometimes asking for help can be as simple as, can you help me put up a few Christmas lights? Or even those people who aren't really sure if they want to put up a tree this year, to tell somebody to come over and, no, you don't have to decorate it for me, but can you sit in the living room with me and keep me company and chat to me while I do it? So those are little examples of help that can make a lot of rituals that bring on a bit of sadness go a bit more easily. So this one's important here, this next one. Remember to remember, acknowledging the elephant in the room. And that's referring to, of course, that oftentimes the person who has died throughout the course of the year is more powerfully, like their essence is more powerfully present in the room, and people feel that strongly, but they may not be mentioning the person by name for fear that everybody else will become emotional and that somehow, quote, that will spoil Christmas, unquote. Well, Christmas is already very different because of the different losses that may have been encountered. And it is a lot healthier to mention the person who has died somehow, even if it's just casually in conversation while you're eating your turkey, and if people need to have a bit of a cry or an emotional moment, that sometimes that releases tension, and that's necessary and that's healthy for the family to do that. And it also gives permission for those closest to the person who have died to know it's okay to mention their name. And just this slide as well, I think that's fairly self-explanatory there. Set aside family differences for a more appropriate time. Christmas Day, I know sometimes death of loved ones brings the family closer together, and sometimes it can tear people further apart depending on family dynamics and history. Perhaps the person who has died, for example, an elderly parent or grandparent, has been the person that kept everybody else together, maybe kept everybody else from arguing. But now that that person's calming influence is no longer physically present, it creates extra stress on the family. But again, try and avoid that through the Christmas season. It's not usually helpful to dwell on family conflict at this time. And people may say things that they wouldn't say at other times of the year because of the heightened emotion that Christmas can bring. Let people know that it's okay to have some joy. Some people find themselves enjoying being in the presence of children or grandchildren that are really excited and delighted about Santa coming and all of that, and it distracts them temporarily from their grief and pain. And sometimes then they feel a little bit guilty. How can I be laughing, or how can I be enjoying myself when so-and-so is dead? But to let people know that that's okay, and that will happen. As human beings, we're resilient, and there's always moments of contentment and peace and glimmers of joy that happen in the midst of the deepest and darkest of tragedies. Also, I think we would acknowledge too, the dread of anticipation is harder than the actual event. A lot of people can have a lot of anxiety as, say, December 24th and December 25th approach, that when the days themselves actually occur, the days flow. And that's actually very good, that some people have found, all of a sudden it's Christmas night and they're just wondering, how did I ever get through the last 48 hours? But I have, and hopefully now next year things will be a bit different. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, but the importance of having maybe sometimes a bit of a plan in place, that can help those days flow if people are concerned about being lonely or left on their own through them. And of course, paying attention to our physical health is important as well. Diet, exercise, and rest, when basically our world as we know it is shattered. That's quite key. And of course, this is, Paul and I, the last few years, most of my presentations have been at the Health Sciences Auditorium in St. John's. So we don't quite specify certain religions and who people can connect with, but we do always tell people to, consider how their belief systems can help them, and ask people's family and friends to give them the gift of tolerance this year. And that's what we encourage. And of course, those of you who are in church settings will have other offerings, sometimes longest night services, different types of Bible study groups, what have you, that can also help people work through the pain of their grief. When Paul and I have been doing this presentation, we also acknowledge the importance of children who are grieving as well. And so we just have 2 slides with a few tips. I really enjoy working with children, and I found them very interesting, some of the comments that they make around Christmas. Sometimes in the presentation I will share a little bit about that. But what is, these are, okay. So we want to let kids know that adults may be sad, but it isn't their fault. That's key. The youngest of children, even if they are nonverbal, pick up on, I guess, atmosphere and mood in a room, and they know when adults are out of sorts, and then that can affect their behavior. So it's important perhaps to just tell even the smallest of kids, mommy or daddy is sad, or nan or
you know, your grandfather is sad, it's not your fault, and say why they're sad. You know, so-and-so has died. We encourage people to use the word died as opposed to gone away or passed away, because that looks like those expressions are a bit confusing for children. Gone away, that looks like somebody left by choice and has disappeared out of their lives. Passed away, kids don't really get that either, whereas dead is final. It sounds very raw and mean in some ways when adults are talking to use that word, but the finality with children can be helpful. Prepare kids for the questions and comments that may come from other kids, and understanding, of course, that children can play and have fun 1 minute and still be upset. So the fact that they may cry and then go and pick up their Barbies or their train set, that doesn't mean that they don't understand that something is going on. That's just their cognitive age, and they deal with their grief in smaller doses than what adults do. And of course, as adults, we can have conversations with kids to see if they have any fears or worries about these special days. And these tips here, you know, encourage their thoughts and ideas, be prepared for their questions. Sometimes we never know what kids will say, of course, and we all know kids are different from adults. And I have found if I want to ask children in my life if they have any fears or worries, or figure out what they're thinking about or what their ideas about death are, it's to get it in the context of play. Not a direct question, not you know, sitting down eating a snack. That's not when it comes out. It comes out in play, and even in the middle of, I don't know, playing with ponies if it's a girl, or Ninja Turtles with a boy. That is sometimes when children will really share what they're thinking in play, and even, you know, pay attention to what they're playing, because it can be really interesting. They can be having toys act out what they feel or their interpretation of what's happening in their own family. And some, you know, lovely questions from kids can include, does Santa go to heaven? Will Santa find Mom in heaven? And those are typical ones that I think, to be responsible adults, if we have children in our lives when close family and friends have died, that we need to think about how we're going to answer, and how are we going to give a child comfort, and how comfortable are we with our own belief system in responding to questions like that. It's important to have a little bit of that worked out as well, because I do have some relatives who are not as spiritually inclined, and they've told their children about, you know, so-and-so is in heaven, and feel very unprepared then to answer the follow-up questions about what heaven is like, and is McDonald's in heaven, and all sorts of things like that. So again, anybody utilizing that quick answer that you think will handle everything, you might be in for a few surprises there.
Indeed.
So just on another practical note, and we do this in our presentations, not everybody needs to do this, but again, everybody learns differently, everybody processes things differently. So just to show people a sample worksheet, if they're experiencing a lot of confusion and wondering what they should do this Christmas, they can create a coping worksheet to address the to-do list. And here are the columns, and we just have a sample worksheet up, what we always did, what we feel like doing this year, what someone else can do, and what to skip this year. And next year that list can look completely different, but it's something to think about early on, and we would encourage people, don't wait till the 20th of December to do up this list. Maybe think about it earlier than that. All right? We get a version of this question quite a bit from our clients, from, I guess, people who attend sessions. Is mourning or is grief ever complete? And I think we would say that the short answer, there's no finite limit on our grief, but we know we're doing better when we can experience pleasure, we can take on new roles, we can look forward to new events, when memories of the deceased no longer mainly evoke sorrow and pain, although occasional sadness can occur. So, do you mind, Paul, if I just go on with this? Or what?
Go ahead.
Okay. Sorry. So then the third part of our program, and I'd like to highlight that we usually divide our program into 20-minute blocks. So part 1, 20 minutes, part 2, 20 minutes. Part 3 normally wouldn't exceed 15 minutes. This is an optional part of any Coping with the Holidays event that you design. You can ask somebody who is really about perhaps 3 or 4 holiday seasons along, at least, in their own grief, if they would like to come and speak to the group that you're organizing, just how they handled Christmas themselves a few years ago, what they found helpful, what worked well, what didn't work well, what they would do differently in hindsight. So that can add to the program, but I think reiterate that flexibility is important in designing Coping with the Holiday sessions. So I'm just thinking, I once covered an area, peninsula, so Grand Bank to Bonavista. So running Coping with the Holiday sessions in that geography where it's mainly rural communities and everybody knows everyone, not as many people are inclined to come forward and volunteer to give a bit of their personal story, and I think that's okay. I mean, use the time to have more of an interaction with people and let them ask questions if you have a comfortable atmosphere there. They may open up. So that's another option that you can do there. Now, we also do, as part of Coping with the Holidays, an act of remembrance, and we usually have a musician who plays some instrumental music, and just, I guess it's the penultimate part of our program, where we invite people to come and take an ornament off a Christmas tree that we have, and I'll just get into a little bit of that practical stuff in a minute. You don't have to do this. Ornaments do cost money, but sometimes it's a nice frill if your particular group can afford to do it. I think we spend about $2.50 per ornament, and we buy them at Costco in bulk, and we're careful about not opening up too many packages, because Costco does. We always have our Coping with the Holiday sessions well before the middle of December, so we're able to return unopened boxes, so that's helpful. Sometimes people feel they would like to ask different community groups to make homemade decorations. If that's something you want to do, I mean, go for it, but it's not necessary, and it can create a lot of work that's really not necessary, because I think most people who come to Coping with the Holiday sessions, they want to hear some practical wisdom. They don't really, the decoration in and of itself is not what makes or breaks the program, but sometimes I think we get mired in the weeds of the details. And what we do, depending on the type of ornaments that we buy on a particular year, we have a variety usually things that are fairly tasteful. I think when I inherited the St. John's Coping with the Holiday sessions, for many, many years, probably 10, there had been doves given out, and the doves came in packages where you got 2 for $1.50, and it was very cost effective, and it was, oh, you had to give doves at the Coping with the Holiday session. Well, you know, that's at a time when a lot of Buck-or-Twos and Dollaramas stocked doves. Doves are actually a lot more expensive these days, and they're difficult to get, but the world doesn't end if you can't give out a dove or whatever you've given throughout your established traditions with these types of sessions. So we just looked up a little bit of meaning of what certain colors can mean, you know, not to get, you know, to flying high in the clouds, this sort of thing. But we just looked at different colors. Okay, light red, if we have it, joy and passion, red, courage, white or silver, innocence and purity, gold, wisdom, blue, loyalty and integrity, snowflake. You get snowflakes at Pier 1 sometimes for a really good price. Intricately beautiful and unique. And Paul does a fantastic job of introducing this session and inviting people just to come forward and pick an ornament to take. Pick a color that you best feel represents your loved one's personality. So that's what we do. That's the when we established that there were no more dolls. This is the new tradition.
Moratorium on dolls.
This is moratorium on dolls.
Endangered species.
Yes, but I have always found most people are very pleased and grateful to have attended the session, and it's very unlikely that they will be attending 2 years in a row. So they really don't know what you did the year before or 5 years before. If any of you would like additional information on running these sessions, by all means, get in touch with us. That's our main telephone numbers there, and we'll be happy to speak with you. Now, some helpful tips. Is it okay if I do that too? I'm sorry, Paul. I've taken my time over. The timing of the event, I'd like to mention that. Please don't wait until the 15th or the 20th of December to plan your Coping with the Holidays sessions. Ideally, it should be late November, early December, so that people are equipped to be thinking about how they're going to handle Christmas and have enough time to think about what they're going to do different and make some plans. And that's really the strength of this session, I think, is that it helps prepare people in advance. For advertising, I think in terms of the church settings, personal communication can work better than mass announcements. So we found when we've run Coping with the Holiday sessions in more rural areas, if people have gotten, if you know about different people in your congregations that have lost a loved one throughout the last year or two, a phone call or a personal email to them sometimes garners more attendance than just mass bulletin announcement, although that's an effective way of advertising as well. We advertise on the radio, and we send personal letters as well. Just depends on your context. I think I've been talking about the importance of flexibility with the program. That's essential. We've discussed, I guess, what we do today and what works best and the elements it should contain, but that can look a little bit different depending on your own circumstances and the resources and the people resources that are available to you. Creating a meaningful setting is helpful. We usually have a small Christmas tree that we put our ornaments on, and then that's pretty much about it. Lighting, I recommend keeping some lights on. I think there's a tendency last year at the Health Sciences, everybody who'd been at Coping with the Holiday sessions for 10 or 15 years, they all like to turn out the lights, and that's true. It creates a nice, peaceful mood and setting, but then we're not all trying to play spotlight either. So there were actually some people last year who came up after and didn't like the fact that the room was completely dark. They found it difficult to see the presenters. And actually, when you think about darkness, perhaps they're feeling there's enough darkness in their lives as it is. So don't worry about creating the perfect mood, because the mood is bleak. And there's a big difference. I've worked as a parish clergy, and we can think we're prepared for doing Coping with the Holiday sessions because we do funerals and we visit in funeral homes and we spend time with people. But the difference with this is when we're at a funeral or a wake, the grief in the room is generally directed to one particular grief, one particular tragedy, one particular family set of circumstances. At the Health Sciences, in excess of 100 people, there are 100 different griefs. There are 100 different types of tragedies. And the atmosphere in that it's almost palpable, the tension in the room. So it is important, I think, to be prepared that these sessions can emotionally or physically tire us out a little bit, and be prepared for the reason why. And I've done some reflection on it, and I think the difference is the different types of death and tragedies and all of it put together. It almost takes on this living quality that I hadn't really thought that I would experience. Okay, so I'm just sharing that with you folks. Harness the comforting influence of music. Sometimes, most of the time, we have a musician and they will play as people gather, and sometimes in between sections of the program where we may be changing speakers. Best for the musical interlude, not to go on too long. We usually have a bit of instrumental music play while people are picking up their ornaments. Again, flexibility. Sometimes I've organized coping with the holidays events in certain venues where whoever was taking care of the music decided that they'd have soloists and sing happy Christmas carols, and I decided, well, I'm not really sure if that's what we should be doing, but these people are volunteers and they've done this, and you know what, that's okay. Let's be flexible. Let's adapt to where we are and what the people feel will be helpful for those who are coming from their particular area. I do find some selections of, you're thinking about what you want in terms of instrumental. If people are going to play Christmas carols, when I'm presenting and I'm using, I guess, my full script for the program, I do quote from It Came Upon a Midnight Clear, that haunting melody, basically is the story of salvation and restored hope through the birth of Christ. And I do quote from one of those verses where it mentions, and you beneath life's crushing load. So sometimes I tell our musicians, you know, can you incorporate that one in, because I'm actually going to quote from it. And Oh Holy Night, Silent Night, Holly and the Ivy works well too. Some people might find it disrespectful if we play, you know, Have a Holly Jolly Christmas, Joy to the World, but trust to the musicians that, you know, they'll usually know what's most appropriate. The role of the presenters, I think I've mentioned, we're not trying to fix people but to help equip them. And even though I recognize this setting as Queen's College, so a lot of people who will be listening to this are community clergy, or they're church volunteers, or you know, they're running lay education programs, etc. It can be very tempting to, maybe we don't try to do this, but sometimes unintentionally we sort of shut people down by maybe glossing over their pain with the quick fix answers that ultimately all things will be made new in Christ. And of course, yes, as Christians, that's our belief, but we need to be circumspect about when we choose to have that discussion with people. And as people are very worried and frantic and sad as the holidays approach, it might not be the best time to give them the pat theological answers. Sit with them. As that quote from Henry Nouwen says, sit with them. Let people express sadness, anger at whoever. If it's the healthcare system, that anger at God, anger at other family members, anger at the situation, and their discontentment, and sit with them with that, because sometimes people are on a journey and they will discover who they are and how their belief system is going to help them in their own time with the right sort of encouragement from us. I think they do it in a healthy manner. So oh yes, this one, to pray or not to pray? That is the question. I think it depends on the context. Paul and I, of course, who we invite, we get the next of kin names and addresses from all people who have died in St. John's healthcare facilities. So we don't know who's in our audience. So, and it's a fairly large audience, so we normally wouldn't pray in that particular situation because we're not sure who's there, and we have had people from other world religions come. So, but then I guess if your church is running one of these programs, then the expectation may be that there will be prayer. So what sort of prayer are we going to have? And again, it comes back to, not fixing people's situation or glossing over the pain that they may be feeling. One time I was asked to pray on the spot, a group that I didn't think would be interested in prayer. As a collective group, I think there were 42 of them. This was in a smaller community, and they asked, would I have a prayer? And so I think I would craft prayers in coping with the holidays, perhaps at the end, to highlight God's constant presence as a source of comfort, strength, and hope, really through the deepest and darkest of our Decembers. So that would be my main line there, and that's my theme, and that's my focus in any prayer that I would offer at a Coping with the Holidays event. And something else that's very practical here, nobody's type of grief trumps another's grief. And occasionally, if people get chatting, people will say, well, the death of a child has to be the absolute worst. And, statistics show that I think 95% of people do think that the death of a child has to be the absolute worst. But people come to Coping with the Holidays with all sorts of grief. So we're not in a contest to see who has the right to be the most miserable. A good facilitator will just mention, well, yes, a group, the death of a child is very awful, but different people have different life circumstances, depending on whether you have children or not, for example. The types of loss that you may have encountered over the last year can be quite devastating, and so everybody has the right to be at Coping with the Holidays and has the right to grieve. So we want to be very diplomatic in how we handle comments sometimes that come from out of left field that a lot of people might nod their heads and agree with, but we really don't want to isolate people in our audiences unnecessarily either. So just be conscientious that if somebody says something that you're thinking, okay, yeah, they said that, and yes, there's validity in it, but I think I need to mitigate the impact on this to the people in the room who have other sorts of losses. Oh yes, I think I've mentioned this for part 3. If you're going to have a guest speaker, should be at least 3 to 4 years into their own grief journey. Focus needs to be practical, usually 15 minutes tops, and we would encourage that if you ask someone to be the guest speaker, have a discussion with them to establish that they're far enough along into their grief journey that you feel comfortable. They're not going to use their speaking time into some sort of personal testimony about their own life journey, that we do prefer them to focus more on sticking to the facts about how they handle Christmas, what they would do differently. Now, if they want to discuss certain aspects of how they handle their grief, that's relevant and that's okay. But again, better to choose an appropriate person who will speak for a few minutes than somebody who may not really understand the purpose of why they've been invited. And I think I've been mentioning this about ornaments as mementos, being flexible. Oh yes, so really our part 5, which we don't actually have classes part 5, but it is part 5, we do have a social time following picking up the ornaments. And I guess we call that loitering with intent, or ministry of presence, I guess, is another term we can use. A lot of people are uncomfortable asking questions in a larger group. So the purpose of that social time, yes, fellowship is really nice, but over something to drink and a piece of fruit cake or a cookie, people who are shy will approach the presenters far more willingly and more comfortably than they will in the larger group. And my suggestion to people is, I think sometimes we think that we have to put on a really big spread and a big lunch for people. After an event like this, It's not necessary because, quite frankly, a lot of people don't feel like eating. This session, even going forward, picking up a decoration on behalf of, a loved one who will die, yeah, that's emotional. They don't always want to eat very much. They may stick around to speak. So, I would say don't feel that you have to spend a lot of money or put, say, members in a particular church group, a hospitality group, to a lot of work because it may not be eaten. Sometimes like a fruit cake and a few cookies is just fine, and cold drinks that sometimes people don't even want to stay for coffee or tea, but they do want that focal point, I think, of a table where they can stand around and linger and ask questions and maybe tell a little bit of their personal story, because something we've said in part 1 or part 2 or part 3 has just inspires them. Oh, wait now, that doesn't really fit my situation, but I have a question. I'd like to run, X, Y, and Z by somebody. So that's what we do. And I guess that concludes the description of our program. Do you have anything you want to add, Paul?
Just to add that there is another resource that is available to clergy who have individuals in their congregations that are grieving. This past summer, I compiled a 25-page document that I use with my grief clients. It's called Understanding Grief After Losing a Loved One, and it's a lot of very practical information that I give to clients. It's meant to be a resource for them to help understand their own grief journey, but also I encourage people to use it as a conversation starter with their loved ones, because lots of times in grief people don't know how to verbalize what they're going through, and that can cause tension and conflict in families. So I encourage them to use it, and I walk them through the document, and I encourage them to use it as a point of contact with loved ones to help explain what they're going through, to foster greater understanding and communication. A lot of practical information there. All the grief supports that are offered through Eastern Health and in the community are listed there, and people might be surprised at how many. There's a page and a half of different support groups and bereavement resources that are available. There's a page of online links, videos that people can watch for specific types of loss and things like that. I will make that link available to Dr. Singleton, and he can attach it to this presentation if you feel that's helpful to you. For anyone in your congregation or people you know that can use it, feel free.
Yeah, that would be an excellent resource for people. And so typically when you have the sessions at the Health Sciences Center or other centers, do you have a resource materials that you distribute to people, or do you distribute it by other means this time of year?
Yeah, we usually have a handout that we prepared. We used to use a one that was specifically Christmas, but I think we're moving this year more towards a one that's more general about grief, that includes follow-up resources, because those who've attended are hearing how to handle Christmas. So yeah. This handout contains more, I think, general info. So we'll have a few copies there in the auditorium, but I think we encourage people to leave their email, and we will email them the handout, because it's fairly lengthy, and it helps save trees too. We know that then those who request it really want to read it.
Right, yeah, good. One of the things that crossed my mind when you were presenting it you mentioned about music and also about prayer and those things. I guess that becomes one of the things you have to sort out, particularly when you're doing it in an area. And actually I might ask you to comment on this, whether you, from your experience, would encourage all churches to do something like this, or to work collaboratively in broader community context.
I think working collaboratively in the broader community context adds strength to the event. Even, and know your target audience. Who are you really inviting to this? Are we inviting people who are Anglicans, Pentecostals, practicing Roman Catholics? If we say that it's open to all, whatever denomination we are, it's open to the broader community, which means we may get people who are not as comfortable with our particular traditions, then maybe the event may be more appealing to those people if it's held in a community center. So we have to look, and I think everybody knows their context, and there are some ministerials that operate very well ecumenically, where they do plan events, and those events are very well done, but have the discussion. If you're having it at a community center and this is a community-wide event, then look at the end, we're probably not going to stay behind for the rosary. So, I say that a bit facetiously, but just to illustrate the point. If we're saying we're welcome to all, then it needs to be open and welcoming to all.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
Grief is one of the things, too, that displays our common humanity, I find. It's something that links all of us at some point, and we found in the groups we've run at the Health Science Center, we get a wide array of backgrounds that attend, and the first session, people tend to be very awkward because they're with a bunch of strangers. They know nothing about different backgrounds, different belief systems, but it is amazing to watch how quickly that dissipates. And a comment we will always hear is, I am with people who get it, who get me. And by the end of those sessions, in some cases, there's been lasting friendships that have formed across a wide variety of belief systems. And I think that's very healthy. It's been a very healthy experience for us. Yeah.
Right. Good. Any other questions or comments or anything?
I think it's important work. I think it's extremely important work for particularly for those who are grieving, obviously, because I think as we been implying all along, this is one of the times of the year when they feel that they're most separated from what's going on in culture and what's going on in their families. So I think that whole notion of welcoming in those who in the middle of everything that's going on are really not just strangers, they're not just on the periphery, they're almost like they're in another country. Because of, and that whole piece, like, I think it's just extremely important work, and it needs to be done in a way that best is open and able to respond to the people in your area. In St. John's, it'd have to be more open, it'd have to be more, I won't even use the word ecumenical, I'd get rid of all the religious language altogether.
Yeah.
It has to be more spiritual. You get yourself in small communities where there are primarily 2 or 3 at the most denominations. I think not to mention not just the spiritual, but the religious in that would be an affront to people. Even those people who don't particularly come to, as they say, darken the door at church, but they still, I think you need to do it. So, like, again, like, your context is so significant.
Yeah.
I think also the significant loss, especially in the first year. For some people, they find the second year worse than the first year because they're kind of in a fog. Looking at the outdoors here today, but they're kind of lost in it in the first year. But there's a more sense of how different things are, and Christmas particularly has that way of there's an intensity in the memories. There's an intensity in the socializing and an intensity in the smells and in the traditions and all that, and you take a loved one out of it, and it's very devastating and frightening, and makes people so aware of the absence. Sometimes you could say, when we gather for the family events of special occasions, the person who's most present is the one who's not there. You're so aware of them, more aware than if they were sitting at the end of the table, kind of thing. So it's good to prep people on this, and I'm delighted all the good work you've been doing and continue to do with it. And we look forward to having people view this and probably follow up with us or to you. We'll pass it on to you if there are inquiries or anything through Queen's College, and also the distribution of the material that you've developed, Paul. Looks like great stuff and a great resource for people. So we'll paste the PDF on the website so that people might be interested, and also include the link to it in our electronic newsletter that we do often, and so we'll follow up on that. So, any last word or comment from you, Reverend Dr. Jacinta Penny, Director of Pastoral Care and Ethics at Eastern Health?
Well, the Coping with the Holiday sessions for this year at the Health Sciences in St. John's are December 6th from 7 to 8:30, and December 6th, 7 to 8:30, December 7th, 2 to 3:30. We're offering an afternoon option and an evening option. And we would invite anyone listening to the presentation, if you don't feel you have time this year to run your own event, by all means, if you're in the area, come by. You're welcome to attend, watch us in action, watch a real live one of these unfold, and speak with us, and then you may feel like you want, and from then on, to organize your own. But we throw that invite out there.
Great, thanks, Jacinta. Paul, anything from yourself?
I was a parish clergy for 27 years before joining Eastern Health, and I know what it's like to be in a church, in a parish, and be looking for resources to help people. The good thing about this program is you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's very user-friendly. Take it and adapt it to your circumstance, and just hopefully it just helps clergy to be more effective in helping people. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Great. Thank you both. Thank you for all the work you do, and those who are online and viewing later, thank you for your attendance and participation as well. Bye-bye.